President and I have been working on a program to do here in Vermont with the help of the Johnson Family Foundation. That's not, unfortunately, Greg Johnson's family. No, it's coincidental. But we would like to do everything we can to celebrate both the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, but also the role that law and policy have played in ensuring LGBTQ rights. I think that's really fantastic. And I think, as some of you know, my law firm is the one that brought the Obergefell case in the U.S. Supreme Court, and my law partner, Ted Olson, is the one that argued the case successfully in the court. So I feel a very deep connection to that. So I'm thrilled. I know I might have the pleasure of seeing some of you later this evening looking slightly different, which will be really exciting, and have a great panel. And thank you so much. And Melissa, I think probably you were the one who did most of the organization. Greg as well. Even if you didn't, you deserve thanks anyway. I want to be remiss. Always make sure we introduce folks from the school. First of all, for any of you who don't know, Greg Johnson, wave your hand, Greg. You all know Greg, runs our legal writing program and also teaches constitutional law. Liz Ryan Cole, who has taught professional responsibility for many years here. There we go. Melissa Harwood. Eli, your hand. And I'm really pleased to announce the incoming Dean of Faculty at Vermont Law School, formerly the librarian. You might think of her as the librarian, Cynthia Lewis. And we're particularly pleased to have Cynthia take on. This is essentially the senior academic member of our faculty, so it plays a really important role in setting curriculum, in making sure that all the professors are teaching their classes, and making sure the trains run on time and other stuff. And Cynthia's done that in the library with incredible sensitivity and joie de vivre, and I know she's going to bring those skills to the new task. So you are in really good hands. I have seen this fellow in the guise of Little Bo Peep. So but you have it. So be sure.
Thank you.
I do have flowers blocking. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. They originally had me sitting at the table with the panelists, but I decided I wanted my Oprah moment. Last year, I made the joke that this was my big Oprah moment, but probably read a little bit more like Ricky Lake. So hopefully the chair actually elevates me a little closer to Oprah. Emily and I were saying, we need the lip bracelets, WWOD, what would Oprah do? Thank you all for coming today. We're going to talk. We have 4 panelists who are, those look like shooters.
It's a serious shooter.
It's a serious shooter. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a conversation from our 4 great panelists, and we're going to give each of them an opportunity to chat. I'm going to, in a moment, pose a couple of sort of rhetorical questions that might guide their remarks, but I'll let each of them really truly introduce themselves, but I'll give you down the line who they are and how they sort of fit into our alumni community. So first we have Mia Paz, JD of 2015, and an associate at Hardwick and Pendergast. Next, we have Caroline Fisher-O'Neill, JD of 2004, Director of Government Affairs and Policy and Advocacy for Otsuka, am I saying that right? America Pharmaceutical, Inc. And next, we have Sean Smith, JD and MSEL, class of 98, founder and managing partner at Earth Asset Partnership. And last, but certainly not least, Katie Thomas, JD, MELP, of 2013, Policy Advisor for Energy and Environment Policy for U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders. So thank you all for coming. As the Dean sort of mentioned, we have sort of folks coming from locally and transcontinentally, so we certainly appreciate that. And the next thing I'll do, actually before I move on to asking our sort of philosophical questions, after each of the panelists has had a chance to talk for a few minutes, I'll probably toss some questions out to the group, and then instead of a formal Q&A with that, traditional Q&A, we're going to do sort of a a little bit of a mix-up into breakout sessions. And so we'll have the panelists come out and join, sit at each of the tables, and we'll let them have small discussions, and we'll give an opportunity to jump from table to table so everybody can have a more closer to one-on-one conversation with our panelists. So with that, I'm going to, sorry for looking at my phone, but that's where everything is stored, for my philosophical questions to let you ponder. So first is, how do you navigate being an out professional? Second is, how do you advocate for social justice in and out of work? Some of us don't have careers that are necessarily primarily focused on social justice, and so some of us have to find, sort of backdoor ways to maybe make a difference. How do you deal with clients or professional relations who may have negative views about the LGBTQ plus community? And just for purposes of this conversation, I'm going to refer to it as the community, so with a capital C, rather than saying LGBTQ or queer. We'll just refer to it as the community. Next, how do you develop a supportive network as an out professional? And finally, what suggestions can you offer to sort of maintain the fire for social justice in your day-to-day? So with that, Mia, why don't we start with you, since you're just next to me, and why don't you tell everybody what you do and maybe give some of your responses to those questions.
Okay, those questions are heavy. But anyways, my full name is Amelia Paz, but everyone refers to me as Mia. Before I came to law school, I wanted to do like civil liberties kind of work, but I ended up getting sucked into personal injury, and I'm happy, I'm content for now, but I'd like to start doing more consumer rights or healthcare reform type work. But I'm working at a personal injury firm, and a lot of it is not so much trial work, a lot of it's pre-litigation settlement. But to answer your question, I think the first one is my favorite. Like, how do you navigate? And I was thinking to myself as you were talking, it's almost, you have to be like water. And I'd like to think that I could just be who I am 100% of the time, but sometimes it's not appropriate to talk about my sexual preferences, So I'm not like, I kind of say like in your face, gay all the time, but I can be. It's like I'm kind of like a chameleon, depending on the case, the client, the job, the atmosphere, the crowd. So I would think that is the ability to be flexible without sacrificing or compromising who you are is very important, and that's what I've tried to do thus far. It helps that I'm in Washington State, which is like a super acceptable kind of community. I mean, I came from Florida, and I just didn't want to go back to Florida. So, and I was just mentioning it earlier, moving to Seattle was the best bad decision I ever made, because I followed my partner, who was a MELP here, and she got a job, and I figured, hey, I'll follow you, and I'll figure it out as I go, and everything went bad really quickly. And I just didn't want to leave Seattle, and I didn't know anyone in Seattle, so I was determined to blaze my own trail, so to speak, which hasn't been easy, but it's been very fruitful. And I learned a lot about what I can, not necessarily what I can't do, because I kind of already knew what I shouldn't be doing or I can't do, but I realized what I can do without much resources available to me. And I think it's partly because I've been like water and a chameleon, so yeah.
Caroline?
Yeah, thank you. So I had this was great. Thank you for inviting me here, because it's really such a wonderful opportunity. I know. I'm so happy to have been able to make it this year. And it was funny because, of course, I started thinking my first instinct was, gosh, I don't even know what I have to offer. Then I started to really reflect on my working experience post-law school, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's just so much stuff there. It's really interesting, and I guess I never thought about it in a way where I looked at it all comprehensively. So when so it was a snowy day in 1977. I'm kidding. I'm not going to go back that far. Don't take the microphone. So when I started school here in 2001, and that's when I came out. It was best worst decision I ever made. Don't come out in your first semester of law school. You got too much to worry about, right? But as a child of the South, I was born and raised in North Carolina. It was I came up to Vermont and thought, wow, this is my home, you know, land of social progressiveness. And I felt such a wonderful support system. And then as I graduated, I moved into working for the state legislature in Massachusetts. My first job there was counsel of the Election Laws Committee. The chair of that committee, very supportive of gay rights, a very progressive Democrat House member. And so it was nice to be in that environment where I was quickly, you know, enveloped into this, you know, big Italian family, his family, and it was just a wonderful experience. So I never, and I thought on the whole, working for the legislature in Massachusetts, you know, it's a very progressive body. And there are gay members in the Senate and the House. I did that job for a year, and then I worked for the Senate chair of the Healthcare Finance Committee. At the timing was very interesting because in 2004, the year that I graduated, the Goodrich decision came down, and that legalized gay marriage in the state of Massachusetts. It didn't rather legalize, actually, but it said that the prohibition was unconstitutional, and so, but there was all these components of trying to figure out how to go. Are we going to allow for civil unions, or is it going to be gay marriage? Well, in 2004, a number of states, 11 states, had voter ballot initiatives to define gay marriage as between a man and a woman. Massachusetts was one of those states. So the rules are that you have to vote, a constitutional convention vote for 2 sessions in a row to make that kind of constitutional amendment. So the first year, that was 2005, was the first vote. And it was a vote in favor of the defining gay marriage between a man and a woman. In 2006, I went to work for the Senate Healthcare Finance Chair, Senator Richard T. Moore, who was a Democrat, but voted in favor of the constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage. So I found myself to be in this very disorienting place of, how did I end up here? Yeah, how did I end up working for this man? Now, I was doing great healthcare policy work, and it was a wonderful opportunity, but I felt in that space like I didn't have much of a voice. He and I didn't have a great kind of rapport on a personal level. He was a very kind of work and policy-oriented person, and that was it. So I didn't even have the comfort level to kind of confront him about my concerns. So the best I could do was Marriage Equality was the name of the organization that was working so hard in Massachusetts at the time to protect gay marriage, and they had these big protect marriage equality stickers, and so I would just put that on my my jacket, and I'd sit in meetings right beside the senator, everybody knowing that he was fully in opposition, and that was it, right? That was my voice, the second vote came along, and he voted again in favor of the amendment. And fortunately, it didn't pass. It didn't come to pass. But I was told by my chief of staff, I believe, that he was having a conversation with him and heard him say, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be on the wrong side of history on this one. So in that, it was an eye-opening experience of that political world of playing to the constituency with an issue that is a civil rights issue that is so important to so many people, and how it played out for him, and for me working for him. I moved on. I worked for the Speaker of the House as his healthcare policy advisor, and it was nice. It was such a refreshing shift, because here I was again in the world of somebody who was fully in support of LGBTQ rights, And it was nice to, again, feel that sense of comfort. Acceptance, really. I went on to work for Otsuka about 6.5 years ago, and they are very, very, very conscious of making sure that any member of the company who, needs or may struggle in any way and being a member of a diverse community, that everybody is made aware of that, and there is a lot of work put into sensitivity training and making sure people know how to deal with it. So that again it's a very comforting component, and I feel very fortunate. The last thing I'll say is that I have my boss currently, whom I love, and we have a very close relationship after all these years of working for her. She is from Waco, Texas, and she is a very devout Christian lady. And there's a certain assumption, unfortunately, right, that one makes, right? Somebody from Waco, Texas, who is deeply Christian-oriented, that maybe they would struggle with things like same-sex marriage and supporting that. Well, I ended up asking her. I knew that she loved me. I knew that she supported my relationship. There was no question about that. But I asked her to officiate my wedding 3 years ago. And she was beyond honored, of course. And then I asked the question, or I said, I was really kind of apprehensive, to be honest, because I just didn't know if maybe there was a boundary at some point where your religious beliefs would not allow for you to officiate a same-sex wedding. And she, quickly dismissed that thought and said, if it's anything that flies in the face of love between two people, then I don't want anything to do with it. And so it was really heartwarming, and of course she led a beautiful ceremony for the two of us. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, I've kind of gone up and down with experiences, and they've been eye-opening and helped me to evolve and grow in different ways. I don't know if I really hit a lot of your questions,
No, that was great. The questions are just a guide.
Okay, all right. Well, so that's me in a nutshell in terms of kind of a brief review of my work world experiences.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. And actually, it's funny when you're talking about those decisions, the Goodrich decision and all that. I was actually at Suffolk University at the time, right there on the Hill, so it sort of like brought a whole bunch back.
I didn't realize that.
So, sorry, and next we're going to have Sean, and so Sean, we'll let you take it away.
I feel like I'm on the quiz show. Can I have the second part first? I don't remember any of your questions. I'm so sorry. And I'm also the oldest one on the board, on the panel. So it's interesting that you came out your first semester of law school. I came out when I was at a military academy, and I don't know how wise of a choice that was, but it was during Bill Clinton's presidency and the don't ask, don't tell era, and I was very early in my career at the United States Naval Academy. I grew up in the Midwest and finally escaped the clutches of my Mexican Catholic family and found myself able to explore who I was away from my family on the East Coast. And I fell in love quite quickly when I entered the academy. And I landed up leaving. I landed up resigning because the ethical dilemma was too much for me, feeling very much unsupported by the government in my lifestyle choices, but very much feeling high demands to do high-risk things from them on the other end of the spectrum, and so I left. And everybody that knew me said, wise choice, great choice, you'll go on to do great things, except my parents. And they were devastated and said, you've completely ruined your life. You'll never make anything of yourself now. It was the wisest choice, and it opened up the possibility to go on to law school. So I graduated in '98. I came to law school knowing very clearly in myself that I did not want to practice traditional law. I had interned on Capitol Hill during my undergrad degree, and I was very taken by the critical thinking skills of the lawyers that I worked under, and I wanted to attain those critical thinking skills to help me pursue my work on behalf of animals. I was a big animal activist and very much interested in land conservation, really for the benefit of preserving habitat. So I got my master's degree and I got my JD and graduated. Did not sign up to sit for the bar as a way to not get sucked into having to take a traditional job because I couldn't find any work. And it was a good strategy. I was living over in Woodstock. I was working at Eastern Mountain Sports, which is long come and gone. It was an outdoor gear shop down in Lebanon, and I was trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do with these 2 degrees and a mountain of debt. And I was walking down the street one day, and I came across a sign. It said Landvest. And I thought, oh, I wonder what that is. It sounds, maybe it's up my alley. Well, it was not up my alley. It was a real estate company. And they did traditional brokerage. But what they did do that I didn't know about, that I quickly learned about, was they had this very small boutique consulting group. And they were housed in Boston. They worked all over the country. They worked with large landowners, and they did a lot of land conservation projects. And I thought, they're paying a decent salary. It's private sector. It's a lot of land use analysis, so I'm going to draw on my law degree skills. So, okay, I took it. And thus began this 20-year career in real estate that I could not have imagined ever really sticking with. I stayed with that company for about 7 years, and I sort of peaked in my profession. The company was very kind of mainstream traditional. The consulting group was 5 white, straight men, and I was poster child woman, Mexican American, Native American, lesbian. And they definitely used me to their full advantage when they paired me with prospective clients. And I think, like Mia, I just let people get to know me. I didn't make it an issue, not because I was embarrassed or afraid, but it wasn't the point of the client and I coming together. But in the course of getting to know clients, and most of the work that I did involved year-long projects and spending a fair amount of time in close contact with clients, working for educational institutions, NGOs, timber investment companies, and a lot of very, very wealthy people. I have to say that approach, that just let people get to know you, let them get to see you shine in what you do and bring your skill set to them. You'll earn their respect, and it's so much easier then for them to get to know you personally outside of the professional scope of what you're doing for them. And I've developed so many wonderful, long-lasting relationships with clients doing that. Given the opportunity to expose myself to clients, let them into my personal life a little bit, has had a surprising consequence. And that surprising consequence is in just being honest and myself, I have created a safe space for people to then share their story that they weren't so sure they could do. I was working with a gentleman, and he was looking to buy property for his 2 sons. And we spent a lot of time in the car, eating lunch, eating dinner, driving around, looking at properties, and I got to know a lot about his family and about his 2 sons and why he was doing this. And one weekend, the boys were gonna come up and look at property with us. And I remember maybe 2 weeks before that date was set, he and I were having lunch together, and I don't know how it came up exactly, but I had the opportunity to either tell him that I was a lesbian or take a slightly different course. Not lie to him, but just not be completely direct. And I chose to be direct with him. I felt like I could do that. He subsequently opened up to me to tell me that one of his sons was a female to male transgender, and that it was such a wonderful thing for me to be that open. And he was a businessman, and he knew I was taking a risk doing that. He could have ended our relationship and moved on and started working with somebody else. But in doing that, it opened the door for him to bring his son into our relationship in a completely authentic, safe, welcoming environment. I never realized that there was power in creating safe space and being honest when you sense the time is right. But it really does have a powerful impact. And so I did real estate for a long time, met my wife in 2010, moved to this amazing property that she was stewarding up north near Burlington. And in the last 8 years, we've been focused on stewarding that property together as a regenerative vegan farm and forest. We've rescued some farm animals, we've created a sanctuary, and we have been employing folks in that environment. And sometimes we'll get the team together and have dinner and just kick back and chat and catch up on things. And twice we've done that, and which is kind of normal for me. I'm very open with people, very honest and upfront with people, and in sharing some personal stuff with our employees, again, not meaning to do this, it created a safe space for them, and what's come out of it is one of them shared with us that he's bisexual, and the other one expressed to us that he is non-binary. And we're now stepping back from being openly committed to each other and doing this very mission-driven work as a lesbian couple, and seeing the greater reach that we have in these conversations and creating these safe spaces. And the community that we're building is, it's priceless. So I think follow your heart and listen to your gut, and when the time is right, be yourself with people, because it can have unexpected and multifaceted consequences.
Thank you very much. Katie.
Hi. Should I move this? Yeah. Oh. Can you guys hear me? Hi, I'm Katie. I graduated from Vermont Law School with J.D. Malvin 2013. I work for the junior senator from the Great Green Mountain State. And I get to come back here pretty often because of that, so it feels good to be home. Thanks for having me. I would say, I don't know how this we've gotten on this track, but I came out when I first got here too. This was my first experience being totally open with the world. I'd come out to my family and a couple of my friends knew, but when I got here, I was Katie and I was queer, okay? So it was a really interesting experience, but I mean, this was the first time I'd been somewhere that even before I got here, it had been made very clear to me that this was going to be an open, welcoming community. And then by my second year, my work wife and I were co-organizing the Alliance group. And I would say that that is where I really learned that being honest about myself in that way, kind of to your point, was going to enrich my life in so many different ways. And, you know, obviously it made my academic experience more rich and full, and it made, you know, the rest of life more rich and full for the people who were coming into my life and supporting me because of, you know, those connections. Which includes my current job. There's a bunch of us queers, might be unsurprising, who work for the senator, who volunteer for the senator, who are involved in, you know, his world. And I know that that's been true for a very long time. And so it feels good to be able to be open and honest about myself and frankly not have to worry about it, because I know that my boss is supportive of all of us. It has been kind of cool to watch him get better about the trans community and to be really, you know, stepping more fully into his advocacy for our trans siblings. Just like a week or two ago, we put a trans flag out in front of the office. So now it's the POWs, the American flag, the Vermont flag, and the trans flag. And it is so cool. I love it. So that's been a pretty neat addition to the advocacy that we do. So I wouldn't necessarily say I've had any problems with that, but the first job I had out of law school was at a law firm, and a lot of what happens in DC is just very conservative. So like being water, I don't think anybody there knew that I was queer. I mean, because you know, it was like a kind of a place where you weren't even really talking about your personal life, but for, you know, some of the senior partners would talk about like their kids and stuff, but it just really was a kind of guarded experience. And so I would say, I mean, while there have been really open, rich experiences by being open, I mean, it's not universal advice to just, you know, be talking about that too. I think sometimes you do have to pick your moment. So I would, and your environment. I mean, I think places like DC can be pretty conservative and just conservative and like a little C, just like everybody wears black and suits, and it's just, you know, it's a different experience than it can be up here in Vermont. What else? What were your other questions?
Would you like me to read the questions again?
Well, yeah, because you went through them, and I was like, that's a lot of things. You're not the only one who forgot.
I'll read these again, and as after, you know, you guys can just sort of respond to them as you will. So first was, how do you navigate being out as a professional? I feel like everybody's had the opportunity to really answer that, and I think that that's helpful. One thing I'll add is, Sean, you said, you know, you had this moment where you could have chosen to be open or take another route that wasn't a lie. And as you said that, I was like, you know, that's really why probably I'm so good using sort of gender neutral pronouns, is because I have had those conversations with people where instead of referring to him, I'm referring to them, and how in certain work situations, I've had to talk about significant others in a way that doesn't necessarily reveal, you know, that I'm gay. So sorry, I wanted to add that because I had that thought in response to what you had said. So the second question is, how do you advocate for social justice in and out of work? That's more of sort of the question that sort of bleeds into the other question that is, you know, how do you maintain the fire for social justice in what you're doing? Another question was, how do you deal with clients or professional relations who might not have necessarily the most positive views? Caroline, I think you touched on that a little bit, at least for someone who is going to vote against your best interest. And how do you develop supportive networks in your professional community as an out professional? And I'll just kind of leave that open for anybody who wants to jump in on any of those.
I'm trying to think through all of them.
Let me ask, let's let those linger. I have another question that sort of entered my head again. Sorry to pick on you, Sean, but something else you said was the expectations of your family and those around you who, and the ones you set for yourself, you know, and how you have to sort of, that might be a part of coming out or being out. And so I wanted to kind of toss that out because it really hit with me that growing up, I know my family, as my aunt always said, it's very difficult to come out of a closet with see-through doors. Everyone knew where I was coming from. I was literally and figuratively wearing tap shoes. So, but with that came, so within my family, very low expectations. I was expected to actually, like most of my family was like, why don't you be a hairdresser? You know, like that was the appropriate profession for a little gay boy. And, you know, so there was a lot for me to have to think about and deal with. And then after coming out, I actually sort of let myself believe what they believed and thought there were limits for me. And so it was actually surprising to all of us that I ended up actually even going to college and law school. So I kind of want to kick that out to the panel is, you know, can you talk a little bit more about the expectations that maybe you once had for yourselves or you thought others had for you that you either had to, you know, kind of tell yourself, no, that is the appropriate expectation, or maybe I need to rethink my expectations?
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in here, just because, you know, it's hard to point to what the real driving force is behind my experience in this regard, but I didn't, it didn't really shift for me any personal expectations of what, you know, what my future was to hold. When I came out and, you know, growing up in the South, I had the full support of pretty much every person that I knew, with the tragic exception of both my parents. And I had things said to me like, you know, oh, let me just tell you the best one, the very best one. Because I was gonna write a book with this as the title, actually. You know, you'll never belong to a country club. That was the best one. That was like hard to beat.
And she went back in the closet.
Wait, what? So certainly they had expectations for, you know, what my life was going to be like that were really driven by fear and deep prejudice. But for me, it, you know, fortunately, it really didn't shift anything about what, you know, what my kind of track and vision for my own life was. And so I think that I feel very fortunate in that regard, because I know that, you know, the external world can have a deep, deep impression on your psyche, especially as somebody who's gay. And I think that being in the North, that conscious decision to stay here, like you said, didn't want to go back to Florida, it was that reason that I never wanted to go back to the South, because I didn't like walking into a room with my partner being affectionate and the music stopping and everybody staring. I liked living in a world where it was not even a second thought. It was an afterthought at best, and, you know, it was just such a normal way of life. And I think that that really helped me, you know, at the time that I came out, living in a place where there was so much support, that it didn't, you know, it didn't shift any notions of what I would be.
I came out, I'm trying to remember what year it was. I think I was like 18, I just turned 18. And I felt like, well, now if they don't like it, I can leave and whatever. So by the time I got to law school, all my family knew, all my friends knew. I was not at all prepared for the professional world, because I think maybe it's just because I was in trial attorney, personal injury realm, but I was the butt of many jokes and many a meeting. And I just kind of was like, okay, you know, like it rolled off my shoulder, I think partly because I had such a strong support group at home. And I was raised super Catholic, and both my parents are.
Sorry, can you expand on what you mean by you were the butt of jokes? Can you?
So there was, I'm trying to think of an appropriate. story. So we would have meetings, team meetings with about 20 people on my team, and I wasn't the leader of the team. I was like the second in charge. And so I never had to lead the meetings unless my immediate superior wasn't there. But I realized, because we were all assigning cases, and I was assigning cases to others, and I started noticing a pattern that I was being assigned cases, and we don't often see our clients. A lot of personal injury is remote. Like I can kind of do it from Hong Kong. Like I don't need to see them. Unless we're going to trial, I mean, that's obviously different. But I noticed that I was getting assigned cases that were from like I was like the most marginalized people, and I was okay with that because I felt like, you know, they need my help, I'm there for them. But there was a comment made about, like, I don't know why this case made it to my list if Mia's here now. And I remember thinking, like, wait, what is it? Like, I want everything to stop because I want to understand it. And they said, like, oh, it's your kind. It was either your kind or your elk or something like that. And I was like, oh, am I getting assigned all the gay cases? Like, that's cool. I mean, it's injury work, so it's like really doesn't matter at all. But I thought like that was super weird, so I went and spoke to my supervisor about it, and he's like, yeah, it's Amy Jo's sick joke. I mean, like, I knew she didn't like me. She openly didn't like me. And so it used to be that she gave me all the toughest cases, but then she gave me anyone that had a Spanish last name. And then anyone who she met and she knew was openly gay. And she felt like she was keeping me in a comfortable place. Like, I'll give you all your people so that way you won't complain. And it was just weird, and I didn't want to let it go. I brought it up in like 2 more meetings, and finally my boss was like, just let's sleep and talk slide, because you're going to get fired if you keep making a big deal about it. But I realized, and that was at like the biggest firm I've ever worked at. So I went from like small, massive, medium, and now I'm still at a medium place. But I learned a lot at the massive firm. I learned how to just let it roll off my shoulder. I mean, it hurts. It still stabs deep when someone takes a shot at you. But I had to let it go, because I'm the kind of person who's like, oh, you're throwing shade? Let's fight. Like, I literally was way too aggressive. And I realized I had to tone it down. Like, they didn't need to know what I was feeling. They didn't need to know that they hurt me. And I had my family, my loved ones, my friends, so I had a kind of like a support group to, you know, rely on kind of thing. But there's been plenty of time, even before that big firm, and I was still in law school, my first summer. I remember my boss was like, we're gonna send you to the hood because we don't have any other black people working for us. And I was like, so, I mean, I'm supposed to sign the client? Like, what am I supposed to do? My instructions were like, to go to the hood.
Like, is this common?
Right. Like, I didn't know. But, and then I realized, like, oh, okay, it's kind of like, you know, a slight. But I felt like money is money. I don't care what they look like. If they got an injury, sign them up. But yeah, I noticed a few patterns, and I just was like, oh, it's a joke, and I'm the joke. Got it. We're all making the same amount, like, whatever. But it did hurt. It cut deep. But I had, you know, loved ones back home that supported me. So I think that was a huge, and I feel for the people whose parents, you know, weren't accepted, because I've had my partner's parents ask me to leave the house. Like, it was, I've been really ostracized for it. So I kept thinking, like, I used to hate my mom and dad. And I realized, like, they're not that bad. They're good people. They're super Catholic, but they're good people despite that.
So I want to give folks on the panel a chance to maybe give some last thoughts before we jump into our breakout session. And so I'll just open it up for anyone who has some final thoughts.
Katie's got a thinking face.
I'm trying to think of what
Bueller.
to say. I don't know.
Okay, great. So,
I'll
no,
say a
good.
final
Okay, good.
I'll say a fine. Because it just occurred to me that as I was just saying that, and this kind of touch on what you were asking for earlier, but as I was saying, you know, it was really nice that when I did come out, that I didn't feel like, at least I didn't have the burden of like, what's my future professionally going to look like in any way, and I, you know, as I say that, it's like, well, let me take a moment to offer a tremendous amount of gratitude for all the people that, you know, many decades before me did a ton of work to pave the way. And, you know, to your point about like, what do you do now personally to support the LGBT community and social justice issues? Specifically for this social justice issue, I can say that I always feel like I fall short. You know, I try and give money, you know, that's like a lot of really what a consistent component is. But it's always there in my mind. How am I going to do? How am I going to be engaged? How am I going to? And that's definitely a piece of the puzzle where I feel like I have such a debt of gratitude to pay back, and I'm still searching for that. So.
Well, you're here.
Yes, and that is
So
actually,
thank you.
yeah, it's a nice thing to be able to do in that regard.
And I don't know who said this, but I'll repeat it. Someone said sometimes the best thing we can do to advance the cause is just being ourselves and being awesome at our jobs and doing our jobs well while also being who we are. And so you sort of, I think what Sean was saying, you earn people's respect, and then when they learn this fact about you, you've already got them, and it can change a mind, or it can open them up to be a little more open with you. And so I'm going to take that and say, go be open with all these students. And if you could ask each of you to sit at a different table, and in probably like 5 to 10 minutes, I'll ask the students to switch tables.
Nice. Speed date.
I like it.